5 Buddhist Boundaries for Inner Peace. In today's world, we often feel overwhelmed, as though we are constantly juggling tasks, roles, and responsibilities. In these moments, it's easy to lose touch with our true selves, overwhelmed by stress and distractions. What if the answer to this chaos isn't about doing more, but about doing less, with purpose? The Buddha's teachings provide us with powerful wisdom on how to maintain balance and harmony in our lives. One essential lesson that resonates deeply in our modern lives is the concept of setting boundaries. Not just any boundaries, but those that protect your peace, your energy, and your well-being. In this video, we will delve into 5 essential boundaries inspired by Buddhist teachings that can truly transform your life. These boundaries will not only help you reduce stress, but also create space for joy, clarity, and inner peace. For 1, setting boundaries with time. Prioritize mindfully. In the teachings of the Buddha, one of the most profound pieces of wisdom is the understanding that time is fleeting. Life is impermanent, and yet we often waste this precious gift by scattering our attention across endless distractions. The Buddha's words, "Do not dwell in the past. Do not dream of the future. Concentrate the mind on the present moment," ring true even today. These simple instructions are not just philosophical ideas, but practical guidance for cultivating a life of peace and fulfillment. The Buddha taught us that when we focus on the present moment, we are free from the burdens of regret about the past or anxiety about the future. The present moment is all we truly have. If we spend it worrying or wishing for something different, we miss the opportunity to fully live. This is not just a nice sentiment. It's a life-changing practice. By prioritizing the present, we free ourselves from the endless chase of external accomplishments, allowing space for deep, personal fulfillment. It's easy to get caught up in the rush of modern life. We're constantly on the go, trying to please others, meet deadlines, and keep up with every obligation. I've been there myself, where the constant buzz of responsibilities made me feel like I was living on autopilot. And yet, I came to realize that saying yes to everything doesn't serve anyone, least of all myself. I had to learn to say no to things that did not align with my true values, and to set time aside for things that nourish my soul. That's when I understood that setting boundaries around time isn't an act of selfishness, but one of self-care and respect. Consider the story of Margaret, a woman who was loved by everyone around her for her helpfulness. She always said yes when people asked for favors, even when it meant stretching herself too thin. Eventually, she began feeling overwhelmed and disconnected from her own needs. It was as if she was constantly giving from an empty cup. One day, Margaret heard a teaching that inspired her to pause and reflect. If you do not take care of yourself, you cannot truly take care of others. Margaret decided to set aside time each week, not for others, but for herself. Time to recharge, rest, and engage in creative pursuits. Initially, it felt strange to decline requests, but as time passed, she found herself more present, more energetic, and more capable of offering genuine care to those around her. This simple act of setting time boundaries didn't just give her more energy, it deepened her relationships and allowed her to live with greater intention. She learned that time spent nourishing oneself is never time wasted. The Buddha's teachings about mindfulness and presence give us a roadmap for prioritizing our time. It's not about doing more, it's about doing less, but with greater intention and focus. When we learn to say no to distractions and yes to what truly aligns with our well-being, we create space for peace and clarity. A vital part of setting boundaries with time is remembering that rest is not a luxury, but a necessity. We live in a world that often glorifies busyness, but the Buddha's path encourages us to step off that treadmill of endless activity and embrace the stillness of the present. Time, like all things, is impermanent. We cannot grasp it, hold it, or make it last longer. What we can do, however, is choose how we use it. A key lesson here is that time boundaries are about respect for ourselves, for our values, and for the sacredness of each moment. It's not just about protecting our time from others, but also about protecting our energy from the inner demands that we place upon ourselves. Just as the Buddha taught us to let go of attachment, we must also let go of the attachment to constant productivity. This freedom gives us the space to truly live, to savor the present, and to spend our time with purpose. In the quietude of mindful living, we discover that the more we protect our time, the more we are able to show up for life, fully present, fully engaged, and full of joy. Time spent in alignment with our deepest values and in care for our well-being is the most fulfilling way we can live. Number 2, emotional boundaries. Protect your inner peace. The Buddha's teachings on equanimity offer profound wisdom for navigating the turbulence of daily life. Equanimity, the ability to remain calm and balanced regardless of external circumstances, is at the heart of emotional resilience. In the face of stress, anger, or frustration, the Buddha invites us to cultivate an unshakable peace. A peace that isn't dictated by the world around us, but by the steadiness of our own mind. Setting emotional boundaries, then, is not just about protecting ourselves from others, but about taking responsibility for our emotional energy. It's about understanding that while we cannot always control external situations, we always have control over how we respond. The Buddha's famous teaching, "You will not be punished for your anger, you will be punished by your anger," highlights the importance of safeguarding our emotions. When we allow negative emotions to dictate our actions, we suffer. But when we choose to protect our emotional space, we preserve our peace. From my own experience, I've learned that emotions, though powerful, are not always our friend. When we allow them to flow unchecked, they can overwhelm us, leaving us reactive rather than responsive. I've spent years observing the effect that unchecked emotions have on the mind and body. Without boundaries, we become like a sponge, soaking up the emotional debris of the world around us. But when we learn to set limits and recognize when our emotional energy is being drained, we take back control. One of the most transformative things I've done for my own well-being is to recognize when certain people or situations consistently drain me emotionally. It's not always easy, especially when we feel a sense of obligation or guilt about stepping back. But the truth is, we are no good to others if we are constantly running on empty. The key to emotional boundaries is understanding that our inner peace is sacred. It must be protected if we are to be present, kind, and loving. There's a beautiful story from the Buddhist tradition that illustrates this perfectly. The story is of a monk who was once asked by a layperson, "Why do you seem so calm even in the midst of chaos?" The monk replied, "I choose to remain still in the storm. The storm may rage around me, but I decide not to let it enter my heart." This story teaches us that while external events may stir up emotions, we have the power to choose how much we allow them to affect us. The mind is like a lake. When the waters are disturbed, the surface becomes cloudy and unclear. But when the waters are still, the lake reflects the clarity of the sky above. Similarly, when we protect our emotional boundaries, our mind remains clear, and we are better able to navigate life's challenges with grace. One real-life example comes to mind. John, a man working in a high-pressure job, found himself constantly overwhelmed by the negativity in his workplace. His colleagues' complaints and frustrations would often leave him feeling anxious and drained. John realized that he was allowing the negative energy around him to infiltrate his emotional space. In response, he began setting simple emotional boundaries. During particularly tense moments, he would take short breaks, step outside, and refocus his attention on something positive, like listening to calming music or taking a walk. Over time, he learned to recognize when he was becoming emotionally overwhelmed and would consciously step back before reacting. John's practice of stepping away and resetting himself made a significant difference in his emotional well-being. He was able to stay centered, not allowing the negativity around him to dictate how he felt. This practice is not about avoiding difficult situations, but about choosing to maintain your inner peace in the face of them. It's about recognizing that your emotions are yours to manage, and no one can take your peace unless you allow them to. The Buddha also teaches us to cultivate mindfulness, being aware of our emotional states without judgment. When we become aware of the emotional triggers in our lives, we can better prepare ourselves to respond thoughtfully rather than react impulsively. For instance, when we notice anger rising, we can pause and ask ourselves, is this emotion truly serving me right now? In that moment, we have the choice to let the anger go or to allow it to take root and shape our actions. By practicing mindfulness, we develop the clarity to make that choice. It's also essential to understand that setting emotional boundaries doesn't mean we become indifferent or unfeeling. The Buddha's path is one of compassion and understanding, not of detachment or coldness. Emotional boundaries are about maintaining your inner peace, not shutting down your emotions. By protecting your emotional space, you are better able to empathize with others, to listen deeply, and to respond with kindness, without losing yourself in the process. The key lesson here is that emotional boundaries empower us to take charge of our inner world. By consciously deciding not to let external events disturb our peace, we create the conditions for clarity and serenity. Life will always present challenges, but when we protect our emotional energy, we approach these challenges with a calm and balanced mind, much like a still pond reflecting the peaceful sky. It is through this inner peace that we can meet the world with compassion, wisdom, and love, without being swept away by the currents of emotion. As the Buddha teaches, peace comes from within. Do not seek it without. By setting emotional boundaries, we cultivate this inner peace and create a space for it to flourish, no matter what life throws our way. 3. Boundaries in relationships. Foster healthy interactions. Buddhism teaches us that love and compassion are the cornerstones of human connection. The Buddha's teachings on interdependence remind us that all beings are connected, and through this interconnectedness, we can share love, kindness, and care. However, Buddhism also recognizes the importance of self-care and personal integrity within relationships. The Buddha's wisdom does not ask us to sacrifice ourselves in the name of love. Instead, it calls for a balanced love, one that respects our individuality while fostering deep, meaningful connections with others. Setting boundaries in relationships is not about shutting people out or creating walls of separation. Instead, it's about maintaining your sense of self while honoring the connections you have with others. It's about recognizing that we cannot fully offer love, support, or compassion to others unless we first nurture our own well-being. This concept aligns deeply with the Buddha's teachings on the middle way, the path of balance. In relationships, balance is key. Too much giving without taking care of oneself leads to burnout, while too much focus on oneself creates isolation. The wisdom lies in finding a harmonious balance where both individuals can grow and thrive. In my own journey, I've learned that without boundaries, relationships can quickly become a source of stress rather than joy. Early in my life, I found myself overextending in my relationships, especially with family and friends. I would say yes to every request, often at the expense of my own well-being. It wasn't until I became aware of the toll this was taking on me, emotionally and physically, that I understood the importance of setting clear boundaries. I realized that boundaries are not just a form of self-preservation. They are a way of ensuring that the love and compassion I share are genuine and sustainable. One of the most impactful Buddhist teachings on relationships comes from the Sutra on Loving Kindness, where the Buddha says, "May all beings be happy. May all beings be free from suffering." This teaching calls for a universal love that is free from attachment. It asks us to love without clinging, to care deeply without losing ourselves in others. This is the foundation of healthy relationships, love that allows for freedom, mutual respect, and the space for each person to grow. Consider the story of Sarah, a daughter who had always put her mother's needs above her own. She was a kind and caring person, constantly attending to her mother's emotional and physical needs, often sacrificing her own in the process. Over time, Sarah began to feel exhausted, overwhelmed, and ultimately resentful. She realized that by neglecting her own needs, she was not only harming herself, but also failing to show up fully for her mother. One day, Sarah remembered a teaching she had heard during a meditation retreat. You cannot pour from an empty cup. With this wisdom in mind, she began to set boundaries with her mother. She would say no when necessary, explaining that she needed time for herself to recharge. At first, this was difficult. Her mother was used to Sarah always being there. But with gentle patience, Sarah explained that by taking care of herself, she could be a better daughter. Over time, her relationship with her mother improved. Sarah found that when she honored her own needs, she was more present, more loving, and more compassionate. By setting boundaries, Sarah not only preserved her own emotional health, but also strengthened the bond with her mother. This story illustrates a critical lesson. Healthy boundaries are essential for mutual growth in relationships. When we do not set boundaries, we risk becoming depleted and resentful, which ultimately harms the relationship. But when we set clear, compassionate boundaries, we create a space where both individuals can thrive and feel respected. This is not about withdrawing love or care. It's about ensuring that love is given in a way that is sustainable for both people. In Buddhist philosophy, relationships are seen as interdependent, yet each person maintains their own individual path to enlightenment. The Buddha taught that we must not become so enmeshed in the lives of others that we lose sight of our own path. In relationships, we walk together, but we must each walk our own path, respecting the other's journey. This is the essence of setting boundaries, honoring both your path and the path of those you love. A common misconception about setting boundaries is that it is selfish. On the contrary, boundaries are an act of compassion, both for yourself and for others. By setting boundaries, we create the conditions for healthier, more loving, and more respectful relationships. We prevent emotional burnout, resentment, and unhealthy dynamics. Buddhism teaches that love without attachment is the highest form of love. Setting boundaries is a practical way of practicing non-attachment in relationships. We can love deeply, but we do not need to sacrifice our peace, our needs, or our individuality in the process. As the Buddha said, you yourself, as much as anybody in the entire universe, deserve your love and affection. This teaching reminds us that self-love is not a luxury. It is a necessity for living a balanced, peaceful life. Without self-love and self-respect, we cannot fully offer love to others. Ultimately, setting boundaries in relationships fosters a space where both individuals can experience love, compassion, and personal growth. Healthy boundaries enable us to love without losing ourselves, to give without depleting ourselves, and to create relationships based on mutual respect and understanding. This is the heart of what the Buddha taught: love that is free, love that is balanced, and love that is rooted in wisdom. 4. Work-life balance. Create space for personal growth. The Buddha's middle way teaches us a profound principle: balance. It is the path that avoids extremes, a way of living that maintains harmony between opposites. When it comes to our work and personal lives, this ancient wisdom is as relevant today as it ever was. Too much work leads to exhaustion, burnout, and a life devoid of joy. Too much leisure, on the other hand, can lead to restlessness, dissatisfaction, and a feeling of lacking purpose. In Buddhism, the middle way invites us to walk the path of moderation, finding balance in our daily activities to cultivate peace, well-being, and true fulfillment. The Buddha understood that attachment to either work or relaxation can disturb our inner peace. Just as we are warned not to become attached to material things, we are also cautioned against becoming attached to our work or to idle comforts. When we find ourselves overburdened by work, we risk our health and relationships. And when we spend too much time indulging in leisure without purpose, we may find ourselves feeling unfulfilled and disconnected. The wisdom here is simple but transformative. A life of true balance is one that honors both effort and rest, activity and reflection, responsibility and freedom. I've personally experienced the stress of work-life imbalance. There was a time when I felt guilty for taking time off, as though I was shirking my duties, and equally guilty when I wasn't working hard enough. The constant pressure to be productive left me feeling drained and disconnected from the things that truly brought me peace: family, nature, and personal growth. It wasn't until I began consciously setting boundaries, by creating clear distinctions between work and personal time, that I found a sense of peace. I learned that stepping away from work was not only necessary for my well-being, but also essential for my ability to show up fully in both my personal and professional life. One of the Buddha's teachings that resonates deeply with this concept is his instruction to find your right livelihood. Right livelihood, as part of the Eightfold Path, encourages us to engage in work that is meaningful, ethical, and aligned with our values. When we are fully aligned with our work, it does not drain us, but instead provides us with purpose and fulfillment. However, even the most fulfilling work can become overwhelming if not balanced with time for rest, reflection, and self-care. Consider the story of Daniel, a manager who, like many, became consumed by the demands of his job. He was always on call, constantly responding to emails, handling work crises, and feeling as though he had to be available at all hours. This commitment to his work was commendable, but over time, it began to take a toll on his physical health, mental well-being, and relationships. He found himself growing more irritable, less present with his loved ones, and fatigued in a way that no amount of rest seemed to cure. One day, after experiencing a particularly stressful week, Daniel reflected on the Buddha's teachings on moderation and balance. He realized that he had fallen into the trap of workaholism, neglecting not only his health, but also his personal life. It was then that he decided to set clear boundaries with his work. He started by establishing specific work hours and committing to disconnect from work completely when those hours ended. He made sure to schedule time for personal activities that nourished him, whether that was spending time with his family, pursuing a hobby, or simply relaxing in nature. This shift had a profound impact on Daniel's life. Not only did he feel more energized and focused at work, but his relationships improved and he rediscovered the joy in his personal life. By setting boundaries, he had created space for personal growth and fulfillment, allowing him to approach both work and life with a renewed sense of balance and purpose. The lesson here is clear. When we allow work to consume us, we lose touch with the things that give us meaning and joy. But when we set healthy boundaries and prioritize our well-being, we create the conditions for both professional success and personal happiness. This is the middle way in action, the balance between effort and rest, work and play, activity and reflection. In Buddhism, there is a concept of sila, moral conduct, which includes the understanding that our actions should be guided by wisdom and compassion. This principle can be applied to how we approach our work. If our work causes harm to our well-being, relationships, or the world around us, it is no longer in alignment with the path of peace. By setting boundaries that protect our mental, emotional, and physical health, we ensure that our work serves both our higher purpose and the well-being of others. Creating boundaries between work and personal life also helps us practice mindfulness, being present and fully engaged in whatever we are doing. When we are consumed by work, we may find ourselves distracted and disconnected from the moment. But when we set boundaries, we create space to focus on what is truly important, whether it's the task at hand, a conversation with a loved one, or simply resting. The Buddha teaches us that mindfulness is the key to true happiness. And by practicing mindfulness in both our work and personal lives, we can find greater joy and fulfillment. Ultimately, the key to work-life balance is not just about managing time. It's about managing our energy, our values, and our focus. By setting clear boundaries, we honor both our responsibilities and our need for rest, ensuring that we remain grounded, centered, and connected to the things that truly matter. The Buddha's middle way provides a guide for us to live with intention, to find balance in our daily lives, and to cultivate a path of peace, joy, and personal growth. Number 5, digital boundaries. Limit social media and technology use. In today's fast-paced, hyper-connected world, technology has become both a blessing and a curse. While it offers countless conveniences, it also brings with it an overwhelming flood of information, distractions, and noise. The Buddha taught us that the distractions of the material world often pull us away from the peace and clarity that comes from inner stillness. Digital devices, with their constant notifications and endless streams of content, can easily become a modern-day version of these distractions, hijacking our attention and scattering our minds. In Buddhism, detachment from these distractions is a key teaching for maintaining mental clarity and spiritual focus. Setting boundaries with our digital lives is crucial for restoring this clarity and reconnecting with the present moment. The Buddha's teachings on detachment do not ask us to completely reject the material world, but rather to engage with it in a mindful and deliberate way. In our digital age, this means setting limits on how much time we spend online and being conscious of how technology impacts our thoughts and emotions. When we become too absorbed in the digital world, we lose touch with the present moment, and our minds become clouded by the constant barrage of information. By setting clear boundaries around our use of technology, we can reclaim our mental space and find our way back to a more grounded and mindful existence. In my own experience, I've realized that social media and constant notifications can drain my energy and scatter my focus. There was a time when I was constantly checking my phone, responding to emails, and scrolling through endless feeds. The more I did this, the more I felt disconnected from the world around me, and even from myself. It wasn't until I set boundaries around my technology use that I found a way to restore balance. Turning off notifications during specific hours, limiting screen time before bed, and even taking digital detoxes on weekends allowed me to reconnect with my thoughts, my emotions, and the present moment. These small changes brought about a sense of peace and clarity that I hadn't realized I had been missing. There is a story in Buddhist tradition about a young monk who, upon seeking enlightenment, came across a village filled with people constantly distracted by worldly pleasures. The monk, eager to meditate and practice mindfulness, tried to engage with the villagers, but their minds were always consumed by the distractions of daily life. The monk then withdrew to the forest, where he could focus on his meditation without external distractions. Over time, he found that the more he detached from the noise of the world, the clearer his mind became. This story reminds us of the importance of detaching from distractions in order to reconnect with ourselves and our true nature. The monk's withdrawal to the forest wasn't an escape. It was a return to peace and clarity, a lesson that we can apply to our modern digital lives. Consider the story of Lisa, a woman who found herself constantly glued to her phone. Her day was consumed by scrolling through social media, responding to messages, and keeping up with the latest news. Over time, she noticed that this constant engagement with her devices was leaving her emotionally drained and mentally foggy. She felt disconnected from her surroundings, unable to fully enjoy the present moment. One day, Lisa decided to make a change. She set clear digital boundaries for herself. She limited her screen time to 2 hours a day and committed to taking digital detoxes on weekends. She began to consciously disconnect from her phone during meals, family time, and before bed. Slowly, she found that this practice helped her regain a sense of peace and presence. Instead of mindlessly scrolling, she started noticing the world around her, the warmth of the sun, the sound of birds, the laughter of loved ones. Her relationships improved, her mind felt clearer, and she rediscovered a sense of inner calm. This story demonstrates the power of digital boundaries in restoring mental peace. By limiting our exposure to digital distractions, we create the space for mindfulness and connection. When we step away from the noise of the online world, we are able to engage more fully with the present moment and the people around us. In Buddhism, mindfulness is at the heart of spiritual practice, and it's through this practice that we can truly engage with life as it unfolds, moment by moment. The lesson here is clear. Setting digital boundaries helps us reclaim our mental space, reduce stress, and return to the simplicity and peace of the present. Just as the Buddha encouraged detachment from material desires, we too can practice detachment from the constant pull of technology. This detachment is not about rejecting technology, but about using it in a way that serves our well-being rather than draining us. By being mindful of our digital habits, we can restore balance in our lives, creating a healthy relationship with technology that enhances rather than detracts from our happiness and peace of mind. When we practice digital boundaries, we allow ourselves the space to focus on what truly matters: our relationships, our inner peace, and our personal growth. Just as the Buddha's teachings encourage us to practice detachment from worldly distractions, we can apply this principle to our digital lives, creating a more grounded, focused, and meaningful existence.